Okay, hello everyone. For this tutorial, we'll be looking at the comparison between maximum and democratic governments. Okay, although for this question, it specifically focuses on authoritarian governments. Okay, they say authoritarian, not maximum. Okay, so perhaps there's no need for you to like define maximum government here. Okay, so this comparison of these two types of governments, right, is with reference to the ability to maintain political stability. Okay, so let's start. All right, question analysis, you always use a facet framework. Okay, so let's see how this can be done. So the focus, okay, so this is like this focus thing, right? You won't be able to write in your introduction. So this is just to make sure that you are on the right track and you know which part of your lecture notes you're supposed to draw the content from. Okay, so the content is basically these two forms of government, okay, and how they maintained political stability. And the concepts they're always kind of the same, all right. And we're always looking at cause and effect because it's about effectiveness. So basically, it's like there must be something happen, all right, in order to cause effectiveness or not effective. Okay, and then the effect will be like whether it's effective or not effective. Okay, and the change on continuity is primarily because for this topic, right, remember we have like phase one, phase two, phase three, and there's like some changes here and there. Okay, so definitely we are looking at change and continuity. Okay, is there an assumption in this question? Okay, is there an assumption in this question? The question is assess the view. All right, so therefore this shows that there is a view that this question possesses, right? And so there is an assumption. Okay, and the criteria, right? These are the various things that we can do under criteria. You can define key terms, you can set criteria, you can set context. Just to remind you again, this setting of context, right, is the least important. Least important. Okay, so you only set context when you have nothing else to do. All right, there's no criteria to set, then there are no keywords to define, which is actually very rare. Okay, so most of the time, right, you will not be able to set context, and I don't really encourage this as well. Okay, because it's kind of like a waste of word count, right? You should be quickly looking at the preamble, finish out with the preamble, and moving on to your lines of argument. Okay, so you don't have to like set context if there are other better things to do. Okay, and anything that in addition to like just defining key terms, right? You might also want to look at whether there are any keywords or phrases, okay, in the question, right, that you feel might require you to unpack further, okay, in order to demonstrate understanding. So maybe you have some loaded statement, okay, like for example, blessing in disguise, okay, like for example, unmitigated disaster kind of thing, all right. So therefore, you have some like loaded phrases. Okay, so it might be good for you to be able to unpack them to demonstrate your understanding that you have understood what these loaded phrases are all about. Okay, then yeah, so let's move on to evidence. This question is not just asking about authoritarian as I've just mentioned. Okay, so let's look at the introduction. Okay, so therefore, in order for you to have set the preamble before you move on to your lines of argument, right, you will need to look at, what's the meaning of authoritarian governments. Okay, the question didn't say maximum. Okay, so you don't need to define maximum government because question don't have maximum, right? So you can just list the what types of authoritarian government you're referring to. Okay, and then obviously you need to set out criteria. Okay, because otherwise, how are you going to assess stability, right? Okay, and then question assumption, because the question is key, right? The keyword here is key. Okay, so therefore, the question thus assumes that only authoritarian governments were able to promote the three criteria as stated above. Okay, so remember, as I've kind of like tried to emphasize in last few tutorials, right? There must be an alignment between your criteria and your question assumption. Okay, because otherwise, like yeah, as always mentioned, you don't want your criteria to be a white elephant. Just put there for fun one. Okay, so if you set criteria, right, then you better make use of it. Okay, refer to it. Right, so let's look at your thesis statement, okay, which is a lines of argument. Yeah, so as usual, we have like three lines of argument. Let's look at the first one. Okay, ILA 1 and 2 will be focusing on authoritarian governments. Okay, and you span your three criteria, okay, in these two lines of argument. Okay, so let's look at LOA 1. So LOA 1 is the easy one. So looking at criteria 1, okay, which is centrifugal threats. All right, the ability to suppress centrifugal threats. So this one is quite obvious. Okay, so the first extent in which the statement can be supported, so this means that yes, authoritarian government, okay, can maintain political stability. Okay, it is most obvious in the earliest of independence, right, with regards to criterion 1. Okay, we have done this many times. It should be internalized in you by now, I hope so. Okay, and then and as a result of the authoritarian government's ability, okay, to suppress centrifugal threats, right, this usually justified the rise of maximum governments, remember? Okay, or in this instance, the rise of authoritarian governments, okay, at the expense of the early democratic governments, okay? Then you have an even Malaysia, right? So even Malaysia, okay, also resorted to authoritarian means, okay, to maintain political stability. Therefore, this suggests that yes, authoritarian approach, right, was most effective in suppressing centrifugal threats, therefore maintaining political stability. So this is very straightforward. Now remember, I don't want you to bring in the outlier examples like Sukarno and the PKI coup, as well as Marcos and the MNLF uprising. Why? Because if you write that, right, then it's going to be an outlier because it's not representative. Okay, and you're not going to have a lot of balance. Okay, you cannot say criterion 1 effective, criterion 2 and 3 max record. Okay, you're gonna have like you're gonna have a very different argument, okay, as compared to the others. Okay, so look at the more representative case studies. Okay, don't just use the Sukarno and PK uprising, right, and use it to represent all of Southeast Asia. It's not fair. Okay, so let's move on to LA2. Okay, authoritarian governments having a mixed record, all right, in criteria 2 and 3. Okay, and this I've mentioned this before as well. So the influencing factor or the determining factor or the variable, so these are the various things that we can call them, right? So they would be, right, the ability to share political space, allow political opposition, okay, and the willingness to share the benefits of economic development to with everyone. All right, so therefore this would be the determining factor to see whether authoritarian governments would be effective in maintaining stability using criterion 2 and 3. All right, and then you know that authoritarian governments, right, had a mixed record, so some positive, some negative. Okay, however, regardless of whether they are positive or negative, right, in the long run, the rise of popular opposition, right, suggests that authoritarian governments could not maintain political stability, because we do observe that even in the stable, the more positive case studies, okay, of authoritarian governments, okay, there was still dissent, okay, there was still popular resentment, and therefore culminating in protests and uprisings. Okay, so therefore this suggests that everyone's not happy with authoritarian governments in the long run. Okay, so therefore then you need to bring your, so if you say authoritarian government is not effective, then what is effective? Okay, so that is your own stand lah. Okay, finally your stand, which is only a one-liner. All right, maybe, okay, in this instance, okay, I'm going to suggest that, right, controlled democracy. So therefore, like a hybrid approach. Okay, like you want to have the best of both worlds because we are greedy like that. All right, so controlled democracies like Singapore, okay, would be most effective in maintaining stability, fulfilling all three criteria. Okay, because actually, if you look at your lecture notes, right, even in phase 3, even when they are in the countries whereby there is a return to democracy, right, like for example, Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand. Okay, it's not as if after they have returned to democracy after their popular uprising, right, they live happily ever after. Okay, the democratic governments after that, they were still quite unstable. Okay, they weren't like very effective. Okay, I think it's also because to do with like it might be very hard for them to maintain stability, okay, after so many decades of authoritarian rule. So it was very tough for them as well. Okay, and so therefore they cannot be seen as wow, therefore democratic governments were able to maintain stability. Okay, but if you look at Singapore, on the other hand, it's a very stable and it's a very like blue chip kind of case study. Okay, so we do see that Singapore has been able to consistently deliver, all right, on the three criterion. Okay, whether it's phase 1, phase 2, or even phase 3. That's why I took the approach. I said that actually Singapore would be the best controlled democracies. Okay, so let's look at how these three LAs are going to be developed. Okay, in case some of you are still not very sure, I've created this table. Hopefully it will be a little bit clearer, okay, for you, right? So just take a look at it to see, at different stages, these two types of government, right, have varying extent of effectiveness. Okay, so phase 1, which is earliest of independence, all right, not effective, effective. Phase 2, remaining democracies would be actually just Malaysia lah, because even in Philippines, right, it was Marcos's civilian dictatorship, right? So therefore, during phase 2, Philippines was under maximum government, right? So we do have just Malaysia left, okay, but even Malaysia also have some elements of authoritarianism, okay, like Mahathir's rule, okay, and the pro-Bumi Putra policies, like for example, NEP policy, Okay, whereas for the rest of the maximum governments or authoritarian governments, they have a mixed record. Now, Singapore is a semi-democracy. Okay, it's a controlled democracy. Remember, all right. So therefore, yes, it is the PAP government was democratically elected. Okay, but they have it's a one-party state. All right, where the PAP government actually controlled all the seats in government lah for about 2 decades. Okay, and so Singapore is somewhat like a hybrid approach. Okay, and it seems as to be the most effective lah, and that's at least that's what I'm going to argue. And phase 3 onwards, right? So therefore, there is this trend, all right, of this return to democracy. Therefore, this suggests that this return to democracy is more sustainable. Okay, however, and at the same time, authoritarian governments cannot maintain stability in the long run because of popular opposition. But as I mentioned just now, doesn't mean that they return to democracy, then they live happily ever after. Okay, they still have many challenges to manage. Okay, and there is still like varying extent of effectiveness, okay, in them being able to manage these challenges. Right, so hopefully this will be make things slightly more clearer in case you're still confused. Okay, so let's start with the LOA. So first line of argument. Okay, this is very straightforward. I've done this numerous times, so you can just take a look at this. Okay, so that's for phase 1 with reference to criterion 1, ability to suppress centrifugal threats. All right, just to take note, your case study must have a centrifugal threat. Okay, must have like an uprising, all right, or like either communist or minority one. Okay, then LA2. Okay, so looking at authoritarian governments, okay, having a mixed record, and this would be the so-called influencing factor. All right, and so therefore with regards to criterion 2, okay, which is the ability to promote legitimacy via constitutional processes and elections. Okay, the positive examples would be Suharto's Indonesia or even Vietnam. Now, I'm writing these 2 case studies. You just memorize one. Okay, if you want to be special, you can have a Sarit Thailand as well. So I put here other case studies to remind you that actually you don't need to just copy or memorize. All right, the 2 case studies I have here. You can have your own case studies. You can be special. Okay. On the other hand, okay, the negative examples of criterion 2, okay, would be Burma. Okay, but we also have other examples like Sukarno and Marcos. All right, then with regards to criterion 3, okay, which is the ability to promote social economic development, it is also a mixed record. So the positive example is Suharto's government. Okay, and another positive example of a criterion 3, right, is Sarit Thailand. Okay, the negative example is Burma. Okay, the Burmese way to socialism. Other negative examples will be Marcos and Sukarno. So you can see that Marcos and Sukarno government, right, they are really quite incompetent because they essentially failed to maintain stability on all 3 criterion. All 3 criterion. Remember, they were the outliers to criterion 1 as well, right? All right. So therefore, yeah, you cannot use them to represent the rest of the maximum governments. Okay, it's just not fair. Okay, for criterion 1. Okay, so these are your 2 case studies. Okay, and LA2 is to show mixed record, okay, of authoritarian governments in them being able to maintain political stability. Okay, then you need to have a litmus test paragraph. All right, so this litmus test paragraph is very important because it's like for example, this would be what they have done. Okay, so they have what they've been doing, the positive negative track record, and then they need a litmus test. Okay, like for example, for you will be your final exams. Okay, to test whether you are able to consolidate everything and you're able to like manage this major challenge. All right, so similarly for the maximum governments, okay, so this is their final exams. Okay, so this is a major challenge, right? And what we do see, right, is that it actually happened to the best of them, okay, which is Suharto's Indonesia. Okay, so yes, Suharto was able to promote some form of like political legitimacy, okay, through regular elections and the sharing of power with the opposition parties. Suharto was also able to promote economic development, but even then there are still some negative aspects, like for example, nepotism, corruption, okay, like colluding with Chinese businessmen, for example. Okay, so therefore this will culminate in various riots, and the most serious of which will be the May 1998 riots in the aftermath of the Asian financial crisis. Okay, so since the 1970s, there were already a lot of riots, not riots, popular protests. Okay, and eventually the most serious one that will eventually lead to the downfall of Suharto would be after AFC, okay, in 1998. All right, then this led to the downfall and the eventual resignation of Suharto. So therefore, the analysis was that Okay, this demonstrated that even when authoritarian governments were able to successfully promote political and social economic stability, ruling without consent of the people was unsustainable in the long run. Okay, in the long run. Right? So therefore, this suggests that perhaps authoritarian government was not the key, okay, to maintain stability, especially in the long run. Okay, so therefore, in this slide, let me suggest to you what is my best case study, which is, yes, surprise, surprise, Singapore. Okay, so controlled democracies, taking a hybrid approach. Okay, so having the best of both worlds. Okay, would be most effective in maintaining stability, fulfilling all three criteria. Okay, so remember, your criteria, you must always refer to it, because otherwise, yeah, you're writing an implicit argument. Okay, you're not really answering the question. Okay, so you have your criteria 1, 2, 3, and you can see how Singapore has done so well. Okay, in doing well for WA1, WA2, and finally final exam. Okay, this is WA1, this is common test, this is final exam. So they pass everything with flying colors, right? And the evidence of success. Okay, so therefore, even when they also encountered some setbacks, like for example, the decline in popular vote, okay, in the 1990s. Okay, they were also able to reverse this decline, alright, in 2001. Okay, because there was a general shift in a more consultative style of governance under Goh Chok Tong. So Lee Kuan Yew had to step down, okay, and Goh Chok Tong took over, and apparently Goh Chok Tong is nicer lah. Okay, so yeah, so he was able to win the hearts and minds of Singaporeans. So analysis was that, well, both coercive and non-coercive strategies adopted. Okay, so therefore Singapore was very, very adaptable, very flexible, and agile, all right, also very pragmatic, okay, in using a mixture of both the carrot and the stick approach, coercive and non-coercive, okay, depending on the context, okay, depending on the context, all right, and therefore, because of how they were so pragmatic, right, and they're so clever to choose the correct strategy, okay, to address different challenges, all right, Singapore was effective, in using both coercive and non-coercive approach to maintain political stability. So in conclusion, okay, so obviously you have to disagree because this question is an absolute statement, all right? So it's the key, all right? So therefore, the moment you find that the authoritarian government is not, has, find an example in which authoritarian governments were not able to maintain stability, right? Okay, you have to disagree with the question already. Disagree with the stand already, okay? So therefore, I've clearly demonstrated that authoritarian governments were not always able to promote political stability, okay? And then, in fact, there was this preference for democracies, preference for democracies. Therefore, this suggests that authoritarian government is not sustainable in the long run. All right. Instead, this essay has shown that semi-democracies, okay, which is a controlled democracy, you can say controlled democracies as well, all right, which is a hybrid approach, were most able to maintain stability from phase 1 to phase 3. Okay, so therefore, we're talking about the long term as well. So basically, Singapore is a unicorn. Okay, but please don't write this in your essays. Okay, where they were able to maintain stability from phase 1 to phase 3. All right, using a hybrid of both maximum and democratic approaches, coercive and non-coercive. Okay, yeah. So basically that's it. So make sure that you have watching this video before your final exams, okay? Because this might come up for final exams as well.